builders and players in real estate and construction are huge funders of elections. What we've done is to look at how the consumption of cement actually shrinks right before the election. And the reason that's the case is because all of the cash that's in the construction industry actually temporarily gets funneled out into political campaigns, which means that you actually see a slowdown in building and therefore a slowdown in the consumption of cement. And that temporary drop happens just in the month right before election. Unless you're an industrialist, a criminal, a celebrity, a part of a political party, a dynasty, there's very little space for you to make it in politics today. That elections in India have become exceedingly expensive over time as the size of the population has grown, as elections have become more competitive. Parties are on a kind of constant search for ways to cover their financial costs, and often that leads them down many corrupt pathways. The first is just, and the average member of parliament covers a constituency that has, between 2 and 2.5 million people, which means just to establish the kind of contact with voters requires spending a lot of money to get around and get your word out. The second is that, increasingly we're seeing a lot of parties and candidates spend on digital media and social media advertising. So the advertising budget has grown hugely. It used to be primarily a kind of retail-based campaign where you're glad-handing, you're kissing babies, you're meeting villagers. It's become much more sophisticated over time. And the third is that every political candidate who's serious about contesting offers freebies or cash giveaways in the last 48 to 72 hours of campaigning. It's just giving away anything from cash to jewelry to liquor, in some cases even drugs. The irony is that they have been billing this as a huge victory for transparency, but it's actually not transparent at all to anyone but the two parties involved. The Modi government instituted a new instrument of electoral giving called Electoral Bonds, which sound really fancy, but the way they work is really simple. Any private individual or corporate entity can go to a bank, can buy a bond in any amount they want, and then deposit that bond in the bank account of a political party. The advantage of this for whoever is giving the donation and whoever is receiving the donation is that these bonds are completely anonymous. So the corporate entity knows who they give it to, and the recipient knows where the money is coming from, but no one on the outside knows about the transaction. In years past, there's been a limit on how much corporations can give. They could give up to 7.5% of their net profits. What the government has done is to eliminate that entirely. So now corporates can give unlimited sums. Over 95% of the bonds which have been bought so far have gone to the BJP. Now, we don't know who's bought those bonds, and we can't disaggregate within that 95%, but the lion's share of those instruments have benefited the ruling party. Number one is it could insist that every rupee of political giving, either to a party or to a candidate, has to be processed digitally, so there's no more cash, so everything leaves the paper trail. Number two is that political parties right now aren't subject to any kind of independent audit of their books. So political parties have to disclose their balance sheets, but they're usually created by their own chartered accountants. There's no third-party check on whether or not these numbers have been doctored. So no one really takes it very seriously. And number three is that India has a very powerful election commission which supervises the conduct of elections and is in charge of regulating campaign finance. But the regulations and authorities that that commission has date back to the early 1950s. And so very simple things like politicians paying off media houses to write favorable news stories isn't actually a violation of campaign finance law. So these are three simple things that India could do if it was serious about taking up the challenge.